The desert did not forgive weakness. Under the blistering sun of the American Wild West, the land stretched wide and empty, its silence broken only by the slow, weary steps of a man who had already lost too much. Joseph Harper, a poor cowboy with nothing left but a thin horse and a heavier heart, followed a forgotten trail where hope rarely survived. That was when he saw her. A small Apache girl lay near the rocks, her body motionless, her breath shallow, her eyes half open but burning with fear. Hunger had carved itself into her bones. She should have been dead already, and yet she wasn't. Joseph knew what helping her meant. In this land, mercy could be mistaken for betrayal. Feeding an Apache child could cost him his life. Turning away would cost her hers. With only one piece of bread left, one choice stood between survival and conscience. One small act made by a man no one would ever remember. What Joseph did next would not bring applause. It would bring consequences ones no one could have imagined. Before we continue this story, take a moment to let us know where you're listening from and what time it is in your area. We'd love to see how far this story travels. And if you enjoy emotional cinematic Wild West stories like this one, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Joseph Harper had not always been poor, but the Wild West had a way of stripping men down to their bones, leaving only what could not be taken by drought, debt, or death. He once owned a small spread of land just beyond the cottonwoods, nothing grand, just a weather-beaten cabin, a narrow corral, and a patch of earth stubborn enough to grow corn in good years. It was enough for a man who never dreamed big, enough for a man who believed that honest work done quietly was its own reward. And once there had been laughter there, Sarah Harper had filled that cabin with warmth. She sang while she cooked humming old hymns learned back east, her voice soft enough to calm even the most restless night. She believed fiercely that kindness mattered, that a person could choose decency even when the world rewarded cruelty. Joseph had believed her. Then the winter came early. The snow fell hard and fast, burying the land before the harvest was ready. The cattle grew thin. The corn froze in the ground. Joseph rode for days looking for work, any work, but other men were just as desperate. When Sarah fell ill, there was no doctor within reach and no money to bring one if there had been. She died quietly, her hand in his whispering words he would never forget. "Don't let this land make you hard," she said. "Promise me." Joseph promised. He had not known then how difficult that promise would be. After Sarah's death, the ranch slipped away piece by piece. First the cattle, then the land itself. Caleb Whitmore bought it for less than it was worth, offering Joseph a look of practiced sympathy that did nothing to soften the shame of it. The cabin, his home, was torn down within a year, replaced by fencing meant to keep others out. Joseph did not protest. He never did. He drifted instead, taking work no one else wanted, mending fences under the burning sun, driving half-wild cattle through narrow passes, sleeping in barns, or beneath the open sky. Some men drank themselves into forgetfulness. Others turned mean. Joseph grew quiet. The town barely noticed him anymore. To them, Joseph Harper was a man already finished, a thin figure, passing through the edge of their lives, hat low, eyes down. He spoke politely, worked hard, and left without complaint. Children learned his name only because their mothers warned them not to bother him, as if grief were contagious. What they did not see was the way Joseph still paused to help a stuck wagon even when his own back ached, or how he left half his meal on a windowsill for stray animals, or how he avoided fights not out of fear, but because he had grown tired of watching men destroy each other over nothing. It was easier to survive that way, invisible, unremarkable. On the day he found the Apache girl, Joseph had been riding for 3 days straight, chasing rumors of work near the southern ridge. His horse was old and stubborn ribs faintly visible beneath its hide. Joseph himself had eaten little, just dried beans and a crust of bread he had saved longer than he should have. The land around him felt wrong. The wind had gone, still leaving the air heavy and sharp. The desert stretched outward in pale browns and dull golds, the rocks casting long shadows that looked like fingers reaching across the sand. Joseph's instincts, sharpened by years of surviving bad weather and worse luck, told him to keep moving. He didn't. Something tugged at him, a sense quiet but insistent that the trail he followed had not always been empty. When he saw her, his first thought was that she was already dead. The girl lay curled near a cluster of rocks, her dark hair tangled with dust, her clothes little more than rags. Her skin was stretched tight over fragile bones. For a moment, Joseph considered riding on, not because he wanted to, but because stopping meant accepting a truth he had no strength to carry. Then her eyes moved. They were dark and enormous, filled with fear, too old for a child. She did not cry out. She did not beg. She only watched him as though expecting pain. Joseph dismounted slowly, hands open, careful not to startle her. He had seen Apache before, usually from a distance, usually with guns raised on both sides. This was different. This was not an enemy. This was a child starving beneath an unforgiving sky. His stomach twisted. He reached into his saddlebag and felt the weight of his last bread. He had planned to make it last 2 more days, maybe 3 if he was careful. Without it, he would have nothing until he found work or mercy from someone else. Joseph thought of Sarah. He remembered the way she used to break bread in half, without hesitation pressing the larger piece into his hand when she thought he wasn't looking. He remembered her voice steady and certain, telling him that survival meant nothing if it cost your soul. The girl's gaze never left him. She did not reach out. She did not speak. She simply waited. Joseph knelt the sand warm beneath his knees and broke the bread in 2. He offered it gently, placing it within her reach, then leaned back, giving her space. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then her hand moved. It trembled as she grasped the bread fingers thin as twigs. She ate slowly, cautiously, as though afraid the food might vanish if she hurried. Joseph watched, heart pounding, aware of how exposed they were. Anyone could come over the ridge at any moment. A settler, a patrol, a man looking to prove something cruel. When she finished, she looked at him again. There was something in her eyes now that had not been there before. Not gratitude, not yet, but recognition, as if she had marked him, fixed his face in her memory. Joseph offered her his canteen. She drank sparingly, disciplined even in desperation. He wanted to ask her name, wanted to know where her family was, how she had ended up alone in such a place. But the words felt wrong in his mouth. This was not a moment for questions. He stood at last, his decision made. Joseph Harper mounted his horse and turned back toward the trail, knowing exactly what he was leaving behind and what he was choosing to carry with him instead. He did not see the figure watching from a distant rise. He did not know that his quiet act had already been witnessed, and he could not yet imagine how far that single moment would travel across years, across bloodlines, across a land hungry for reckoning. All he knew was that the desert had tested him, and he had answered. The girl did not follow Joseph Harper when he rode away. She remained where he had left her, crouched among the rocks, the taste of bread still unfamiliar on her tongue. Hunger had shaped her days for so long that fullness felt like a trick, something the desert invented before taking it back. Her name was Ayanna. She did not remember when she had last spoken it out loud. Days earlier, though, it felt like another lifetime she had walked beside her people as they moved through the dry valleys, their steps slow, their supplies thinner than ever. The elders spoke in hushed voices. The children were told to stay close. The world beyond their camp had grown dangerous, especially for the young. Then the shooting started. Ayanna remembered the sound first, the crack of rifles echoing against stone. She remembered hands pushing her forward, a woman's voice shouting her name, telling her to run. She remembered falling, scraping her knees on sharp gravel, getting back up even as her lungs burned. She remembered hiding. By the time the noise faded, night had fallen. The stars looked cold and distant. Ayanna waited for someone to come for her. No one did. She walked until her legs refused to move. The desert showed no mercy to a child alone. The sun drained her strength. The wind stole what little warmth she had at night. Hunger became a constant ache, then a distant numbness. Each step felt heavier than the last, until even standing felt impossible. When Joseph found her, she had already decided she was dying. That was why she did not cry out. Among her people, silence was strength. Silence meant survival. Ayanna had learned early that making noise attracted the wrong kind of attention. So when the strange man appeared dust-covered, weary, his face carved by lines, she did not yet understand. She watched him the way a wounded animal watches a hunter, waiting for the end. But he did not raise a weapon. He did not shout. He did not grab her arm or curse her for existing in the wrong place. He knelt instead slowly, as though he understood how fragile she was. He placed food near her and pulled back, leaving space between them. Space meant safety. She ate carefully, measuring each bite. When he offered water, she drank as her mother had taught her, small sips, never too much. She never broke eye contact, not out of defiance, but because she needed to know if this kindness was real. It was. When he rode away, she felt something unexpected stir inside her chest. Not hope, not yet, but something close, something dangerous. She waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded before she tried to stand. Pain shot through her legs. Her vision blurred. She collapsed once, then again. But she forced herself upright, leaning against the rocks until the world steadied. She knew she could not stay there. Men would come. Men always came. By nightfall, she reached a narrow ravine where the wind carried familiar scents, sage smoke, the faint trace of horses. Her heart pounded. She called out softly, her voice hoarse and broken. Shapes emerged from the darkness. Apache warriors surrounded her in silence, their expressions hard until recognition flickered across their faces. Someone caught her before she fell again. Someone else wrapped her in a blanket, rough with age but warm with purpose. She slept for 2 days. When Ayanna woke, she lay beneath a hide shelter beside a small fire. The camp was quiet, tense. She sensed it immediately, the way voices stayed low, the way eyes scanned the horizon. This was not a place at peace. An elder sat beside her. Chief Nantan did not speak at first. His hair was streaked with gray, his presence steady and heavy with authority. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured. "You walked far," he said. Ayanna nodded. "You survived." She nodded again. He waited patient until she found her voice. It came out thin but clear. "A man fed me." The fire crackled softly. Chief Nantan's eyes sharpened. "A man." "A white man," she said. "A cowboy." Silence settled between them. Why, the elder asked. Ayanna thought of Joseph's hands empty open. She thought of the way he had stepped back, as if he feared harming her more than being harmed himself. "I don't know," she said. "He was hungry too." Chief Nantan studied her face for a long time. He did not smile. He did not frown. He chose, he said at last. The camp moved again within days. Danger followed them now. The settlers were nervous. Traders spread lies. Men like Silas Crow whispered about raids and revenge, turning fear into profit. Apache camps were pushed farther from water, farther from safety. Ayanna grew stronger. At first she listened. She watched the way the elders spoke, the way warriors carried themselves, the way decisions were made without anger, even when anger would have been easier. She remembered everything. She learned the cost of leadership before she ever dreamed of holding it. Years passed. Ayanna trained with the women, then with the men. She learned to ride until her legs ached and her hands blistered. She learned to read the land to know where water hid beneath dry ground, where storms would break, where enemies would approach before they were seen. She learned restraint. Many times she wanted to strike back. She remembered the shots, the fear, the hunger. But Chief Nantan reminded her that rage burned fast and left nothing useful behind. Strength that cannot wait, he told her, is not strength. When Chief Nantan grew ill, the camp grew uneasy. There were others who might lead men with louder voices, quicker tempers, but it was Ayanna they turned to when disputes arose. It was Ayanna whose words calmed arguments before they became bloodshed. She did not seek power. Power found her. On the night Chief Nantan died, Ayanna sat alone beside the fire. The stars overhead looked the same as they had the night she was lost, cold, distant, unchanging. She thought of the man in the desert, the cowboy who had fed her when he had nothing to spare. She wondered if he still lived. She wondered if he knew what his choice had become. By dawn, the decision was made. Ayanna would lead, not because she was the strongest, not because she was the fiercest, but because she remembered hunger and mercy in equal measure. When she mounted her horse that morning, the people watched in silence. She did not raise her voice. She did not promise vengeance. She spoke only of survival, of dignity, of a future that did not belong solely to hatred. But the land had not finished testing her. Word reached the camp. Within weeks, settlers were gathering again near the valley where a small town had taken root. Fences cut deeper into Apache territory. Water sources were claimed, guarded, poisoned with fear. Ayanna listened. She knew that valley. She remembered rocks warmed by the sun. She remembered bread broken in half. She remembered a man who had looked at a starving Apache girl and chosen to see a human being. Ayanna did not smile. She saddled her horse. Some journeys she knew were never finished. Some debts, whether of blood or kindness, waited patiently to be answered. And far away, unaware of the storm quietly turning toward him, Joseph Harper lived his days believing his choice had ended the moment he rode away. He was wrong. Joseph Harper did not expect punishment to arrive so quickly. By the time he reached the edge of town, the sun had dipped low, staining the sky with red and gold. His horse limped, slightly worn down by the same miles that had hollowed Joseph's own body. The familiar shapes of buildings, wooden fronts, crooked signs, the faint curl of smoke should have brought relief. They did not. The town felt tight, watchful. Conversation stopped as he passed. A pair of men near the feed store fell silent, eyes tracking him with a curiosity sharpened into suspicion. Joseph kept his head down, the brim of his hat shading his face. He told himself it was nothing. But when he reached the well, a woman he barely knew pulled her bucket back as if he carried disease. That was when he understood. News traveled faster than truth on the frontier, faster than decency. Someone had seen him kneeling in the desert. Someone had spoken. Joseph drew water in silence and led his horse toward the stable at the edge of town. He had hoped to trade labor for a night's rest, maybe a bit of food. Instead, the stable boy shook his head before Joseph even opened his mouth. "Owner says no," the boy muttered, eyes averted. "Not tonight." Joseph nodded once. He did not argue. He slept that night beneath a wagon, the ground cold and unforgiving. The stars overhead looked sharp enough to cut. As he lay there, he thought of Sarah, of the way she used to remind him that doing the right thing did not guarantee comfort, only peace. Peace, Joseph thought, was quieter than this. Morning brought no relief. By noon, the whispers had grown louder. A man at the general store refused to serve him. Another spat near his boots, muttering something about Apache lovers and traitors. Joseph felt the words settle into his chest like stones. He could have left. He often did when things turned sour. But something held him there, a stubborn sense that running would make the story worse, not better. It was Caleb Whitmore who finally called him out. Whitmore stood in front of the saloon, broad-shouldered and clean, his clothes fine enough to suggest prosperity earned on the backs of others. He smiled when he saw Joseph, a thin, practiced expression that never reached his eyes. "Joseph Harper," Whitmore said loudly. "Heard you've been busy." Joseph stopped walking. Slowly he turned. "I mind my own business," Joseph replied. Whitmore chuckled, shaking his head. "That's so. Because from what I hear, you've been feeding the enemy." A small crowd gathered. Men leaned against posts. Women watched from doorways, their faces tight with fear. Someone mentioned children. Someone else mentioned blood. Joseph felt the weight of it all pressing down. "She was starving," he said quietly. Whitmore's smile vanished. "She was Apache. So am I to let a child die?" Joseph asked. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Whitmore stepped closer. "This town survives because we don't blur lines, because we don't invite trouble into our homes. What you did, it puts us all at risk." Joseph thought of the girl's eyes, of the way she had waited silent and terrified, expecting nothing. If mercy is a risk, Joseph said, then maybe this place isn't surviving as well as you think. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some faces hardened. Others flickered with doubt. Whitmore's voice dropped. "You keep making choices like that," he warned, "and you won't be welcome anywhere." Joseph met his gaze. For a moment, he considered backing down, offering an apology he didn't believe in. Life would be easier if he did, but promises, real ones, had a way of binding a man tighter than chains. "I'll live with that," Joseph said. He walked away before Whitmore could respond. The work dried up after that. Doors closed. Offers vanished. Even men who had once nodded at Joseph now looked through him as though he were already gone. Hunger returned, slow and familiar, curling in his gut. One evening, as Joseph sat alone by the creek, mending a strap that barely held together, a shadow fell across him. Deputy Henry Collins stood there, hat in hand, his expression troubled. "You didn't have to do it," Collins said. Joseph glanced up. "Do what?" "Make things difficult for yourself." Joseph returned to his work. They were already difficult. Collins sighed. "People are scared. They hear stories. They think kindness invites violence." "And what do you think?" Joseph asked. The deputy hesitated. "I think laws are easier to follow than conscience." Joseph nodded. "That's usually the problem." Collins said nothing more. He left without threats, without comfort, just another man caught between what was right and what was allowed. That night, Joseph dreamed of bread breaking apart in his hands, crumbs falling through his fingers, no matter how tightly he tried to hold them. The girl, Ayanna, did not leave his thoughts. He wondered if she had survived, wondered if she remembered him at all. It did not matter, he told himself. Also, the act had been complete the moment he made it, or so he believed. Weeks later, Joseph noticed signs that something else had been set in motion. Tracks near the southern ridge, fresh ones. Campfires glimpsed from a distance, Apache movement closer than usual. The town buzzed with nervous energy. Men cleaned rifles. Women gathered children indoors before dusk. Silas Crow arrived soon after, his wagons heavy with goods and heavier with rumors. Apache are organizing, Crow told anyone who would listen. Got themselves a leader now. A woman, they say. Smart. Dangerous. The name did not reach Joseph's ears. Not yet. What reached him instead was a sense of inevitability. A feeling that the bread he had broken in the desert had not simply fed a starving child. It had sent a ripple through time, one that now curved back toward him. On a cool morning, Joseph rode out alone to avoid trouble, hoping to find work beyond the valley. As he crested a familiar rise, he saw dust on the horizon. Not random, deliberate. Riders. He slowed, heart-pounding. Shapes emerged, horses moving in formation, controlled, purposeful. Not a raid, not chaos. Leadership. Joseph turned, his horse instincts screaming at him to retreat. But before he could move, a figure separated from the group and rode forward. She sat tall in the saddle, her posture calm, her gaze steady. Her hair was braided neatly, her clothing marked by wear and authority rather than desperation. As she drew closer, Joseph felt a chill run through him, because he knew her eyes. They were older now, sharper, but unmistakable. The girl from the desert had returned, and she had not come alone. Joseph Harper did not run. The instinct was there, sharp and immediate, urging him to wheel his horse around and disappear into the scrub where men like him had survived by staying unseen. But another instinct, quieter and older, held him in place. It was the same one that had made him kneel in the desert weeks before, the same one Sarah had named when she spoke of promises. The rider approached at a measured pace, neither threatening nor hesitant. Behind her, the others waited, their silhouettes still and watchful against the pale sky. The wind carried the smell of dust and leather of horses that had traveled far with purpose. Joseph dismounted slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. He removed his hat and held it at his side, not as a gesture of submission, but of respect. The woman stopped a few yards away. Up close, he could see how much she had changed. The hollowed cheeks of starvation were gone, replaced by strength earned through hardship. Her eyes, those eyes were steady now, weighing him with a calm that unsettled him more than anger would have. She spoke first. "You remember me," she said. It was not a question. Joseph swallowed. "I do." A beat passed. The world seemed to hold its breath. "You gave me bread," she said, "when you had little." "I did," Joseph replied. She studied him as if searching for something beneath the years and the dust. "You did not ask my name." "I didn't think it mattered," he said. "You needed help." For the first time, her expression shifted, not into a smile, but into something softer, almost surprised. "My name is Ayanna," she said. "I lead my people now." Joseph nodded, once accepting the truth of it without ceremony. "I'm glad you lived." She looked past him toward the town in the distance. Many there would not be. Her words were not a threat. They were a statement. The moment stretched fragile as glass. Then Ayanna raised her hand. The riders behind her remained still disciplined, waiting for her signal. "I did not come for you," she said. "I came because this land remembers what was taken from us." Joseph felt the weight of it settle in his chest. "And what will you take now?" Ayanna turned her gaze back to him. "That depends." She gave a small nod, then guided her horse away, rejoining the others. Without another word, the group turned and rode along the valley's edge, keeping distance close enough to be seen far enough to avoid immediate conflict. Joseph stood alone, heart hammering. By the time he returned to town, the rumors had already arrived ahead of him. "They're out there," a man hissed near the saloon. "Saw 'em with my own eyes." "Led by a woman," another added. "Smart one, too." Fear bloomed like rot. Caleb Whitmore wasted no time. He called a meeting that evening, packing the saloon with men who smelled of sweat and gun oil. Joseph stood at the back, unnoticed, until Whitmore's eyes found him. "Funny thing," Whitmore said loudly, "how trouble follows certain people." The crowd turned. Joseph did not speak. Whitmore continued, voice smooth and practiced. "Apache, don't just wander this close without reason. Someone invited them. Someone made them think this place was weak." Murmurs grew louder. Accusations took shape without names attached yet. Joseph felt a familiar isolation settle over him. He had known this moment would come. Mercy rarely traveled alone. It brought consequences in its wake. A man shouted, "He fed one of them!" All eyes swung back to Joseph. Whitmore raised his hands, feigning calm. Now, we're just asking questions." Joseph stepped forward. "I fed a starving child." A sharp laugh cut through the room. Apache grow into Apache, someone said. That's how this starts. Joseph met their stares one by one. She grew into someone because she survived, he said. Same as all of us. Silence followed. Not agreement, just the uneasy quiet that came when truth made people uncomfortable. Whitmore's face hardened. You've made yourself a problem, Joseph. Joseph nodded. Then I'll carry it. That night, the town decided his fate without ever saying his name again. Work vanished entirely. Even water from the well came with glares and whispered insults. A stone shattered near his head as he crossed the street, thrown by a boy too young to understand what hatred was teaching him. Joseph packed what little he owned. He slept outside town, beneath a cottonwood tree, the ground cold and familiar. As he lay there, he wondered if this was how it ended, not with gunfire or glory, but with quiet exile. At dawn, he was woken by hoofbeats. Deputy Henry Collins approached, his face drawn. You need to go, he said softly, before they decide to make an example of you. Joseph sat up slowly. Is that the law talking? Collins looked away. It's the people. Joseph rose, brushing dust from his coat. I won't run. Collins' voice tightened. You don't have to die for this. Joseph thought of Ayanna's eyes, of the bread, of Sarah's promise. I won't kill for it either, he said. That's the difference. By midday, the Apache riders were visible again along the ridge. The town bristled. Rifles were cleaned. Plans were whispered. Fear fed on itself, growing bold. Silas Crow moved among them like a spark in dry grass, selling certainty where none existed. Strike first, he urged. That's how you survive. Joseph watched from a distance, knowing his presence only sharpened their anger. He turned away, walking toward the open land where choices still belonged to him. As the sun dipped low, a shadow fell beside him. Ayanna stood there, dismounted, her expression unreadable. They will blame you, she said. They already do, Joseph replied. She studied him for a long moment. You could have denied it. Could have said nothing. I've said enough nothing in my life, Joseph said quietly. Ayanna nodded, as if confirming something she already knew. Then listen carefully, she said. What comes next will test everyone, including me. Joseph met her gaze. What do you want from me? Her answer was not immediate. I want you to stand where you stood before, she said at last. Between hunger and fear, between what is easy and what is right. She mounted her horse and rode away before he could respond. Joseph watched her go, aware that mercy had brought him here, and that whatever followed would demand a price far greater than bread. Time did not heal Joseph Harper. It simply wore him thinner. After the meeting in the saloon, after the looks that followed him like shadows, Joseph left the town before dawn. Not because he was afraid, but because staying would have forced others to choose violence in his name and that he could not bear. He drifted farther west, farther south, taking what work he could find along the edges of settlement. The land grew harsher there, the nights colder, the silences heavier. He slept in abandoned shacks and beneath open skies that offered no comfort, only distance. Years passed. Joseph's hair grayed at the temples. His hands grew rougher, his back less forgiving. Hunger came and went like an old acquaintance, never quite leaving, never quite killing him. He learned to live with less than he thought possible, as though the world were slowly teaching him how little a man truly needed to survive. Yet even as his body aged, his memory did not fade. He remembered the desert exactly as it had been that day. The color of the rocks, the weight of the bread in his hand, the way the girl's eyes had changed when she realized she would live. Some nights he woke with her face still before him, sharper than the stars overhead. Joseph wondered what had become of her. He heard rumors now and then. Apache movement farther north. A new leader spoken of in low voices, described with a mixture of fear and reluctant respect. A woman who did not raid blindly, who chose when to speak and when to strike. Joseph listened, but he did not ask questions. He had learned that asking invited attention, and attention brought consequences. The town he had left behind did not forget him either. Fear hardened into tradition. Children grew into men who had never seen an Apache up close, but knew with certainty that they were dangerous. Stories twisted themselves into lessons passed down until no one remembered where they had begun. Caleb Whitmore prospered. His ranch expanded his fences, cutting deeper into land that once belonged to others. He spoke often of order and protection, of the necessity of strength. People listened. They always did when comfort was offered in place of truth. Deputy Henry Collins remained older and wearier, his badge heavier each year. He enforced the law even when it tasted bitter. Sometimes late at night, he wondered if Joseph Harper had been the last honest man he'd known. Silas Crow came and went his wagons carrying goods and gossip in equal measure. He thrived on the growing tension selling weapons alongside stories that painted Apache riders as monsters waiting just beyond the hills. And the land, ancient, indifferent, watched it all unfold. Joseph eventually settled near a shallow river where the soil allowed small miracles. He built a rough cabin with his own hands, not calling it home, but treating it with care. He planted beans and corn, learned which seasons would bless him and which would not. Solitude became his companion. Some men would have grown bitter. Joseph grew quieter. He spoke to no one but his horse and the wind, and even then, only when necessary. His promise to Sarah remained unbroken, though tested daily by a world that rewarded hardness. Then one autumn evening, everything shifted. Joseph returned from the river to find tracks near his cabin. Fresh, deliberate. He froze, senses sharpening. The tracks were not careless. Whoever made them knew how to move without leaving much behind. Apache. Joseph did not reach for a weapon. He had one old and rarely used, but he left it where it was. He waited instead, standing in the open, hands visible. From the trees emerged a single rider. She dismounted with practiced ease, her presence commanding without effort. The years had refined her, not softened her. Authority sat on her shoulders like a mantle she had not asked for, but accepted fully. Ayanna. They faced each other in silence, the river whispering nearby. "You chose a hard life," she said at last. Joseph gave a faint smile. "It's the only one I know." She looked around the small clearing, the cabin, the thin garden struggling against the season. "You could have lived easier," she said, "if you had spoken differently that day." "Easier isn't always better," Joseph replied. Ayanna nodded. "My people say the same." They sat by the fire as night fell, sharing water and quiet. No guards surrounded them. No weapons were drawn. The trust between them was not born of familiarity, but of something deeper memory. "The land is changing," Ayanna said. "Your people push farther each year." "They're afraid," Joseph said. "So are mine," she replied. She spoke then of the years after they had met, of Chief Nantan's death, of learning to lead without becoming what she hated. She spoke of choosing restraint when anger demanded release, of bearing the weight of decisions that could cost lives either way. Joseph listened. When she finished, she met his gaze. "They will come again," she said, "to your town, to the valley. And when they do, fear will decide everything unless something else stands in its way." Joseph understood what she was asking before she said it. "You want me to speak," he said. "I want you to be seen," Ayanna corrected. "Not as a symbol, as a man." Joseph stared into the fire. He thought of the saloon of Whitmore's Voice of Stones thrown by boys taught to hate. He thought of years spent invisible, believing that distance was peace. "And if they kill me?" he asked. Ayanna's expression did not change. "Then they will have chosen who they are." The fire crackled, sending sparks into the dark. Joseph exhaled slowly. "When soon?" she said. "The valley will not wait." When Ayanna left, Joseph stood alone again, the night pressing in around him. He felt no fear, only the weight of inevitability. He had always known his choice in the desert was not finished. It had simply been patient. At dawn, Joseph saddled his horse. He did not know what awaited him, reconciliation or blood mercy or regret, but he knew this running had never saved anyone. As he rode toward the valley, the years fell away, leaving behind a man defined not by what he owned, but by what he refused to abandon. And somewhere ahead, a town built on fear, prepared to face the echo of a single act of kindness, one it had never truly understood. Joseph Harper rode toward the valley with a calm that surprised even him. The land unfolded slowly beneath the morning light, its familiar harsh beauty unchanged by the years he had spent avoiding it. Mesquite trees cast thin shadows across the dust. Hawks circled overhead, patient and watchful. Everything about the desert suggested endurance survival through stillness, through knowing when not to move. Joseph had learned that lesson well. As he neared the outskirts of the valley, signs of tension revealed themselves like cracks beneath the surface. Fence posts stood newly reinforced. Shallow trenches had been dug near the creek crossings. Someone had taken the time to pile stones into crude barriers, the kind built by men who expected trouble but did not yet know what form it would take. Fear had been busy here. The town appeared much as he remembered it, wooden buildings leaning into time, dirt streets, scarred by wagon wheels, but the air felt different, harder. Conversations halted as Joseph passed, eyes narrowing with recognition, sharpened by memory. "He's back," someone whispered. Joseph ignored them, riding straight through, his posture relaxed but alert. He did not come to provoke. He came because avoiding this place any longer would only let fear speak louder than truth. At the edge of town, Deputy Henry Collins spotted him and froze. For a moment, relief crossed the older man's face, quickly buried beneath concern. Joseph Collins said, approaching. "You shouldn't be here." Joseph dismounted. "Seems I should." Collins lowered his voice. "They're nervous. Apache scouts have been seen near the ridge. People are talking about strikes, about preemptive action." Joseph met his eyes. "And what are you talking about?" Collins hesitated. "I'm talking about the same thing I always talk about," he said quietly, "trying to keep men from doing something they can't take back." Joseph nodded. "Then we're on the same side." Collins exhaled slowly, as if he had been holding his breath for years. "Caleb Whitmore won't see it that way." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Whitmore appeared near the general store, flanked by two men with rifles slung too comfortably over their shoulders. His gaze locked onto Joseph with a mixture of surprise and irritation. "Well," Whitmore said loudly, "if it isn't our prodigal problem." Joseph did not rise to the bait. "I came to listen," he said. Whitmore laughed. "Listen to what Apache demands. To fear," Joseph replied, "and what it makes people do." A few men shifted uneasily, others scowled. Whitmore stepped closer. "You don't belong here anymore. This land doesn't belong to anyone," Joseph said. "That's the trouble." Whitmore's eyes hardened. "You've been gone too long. You don't know what we're facing." Joseph gestured toward the valley. "I know exactly what you're facing. You've been feeding it for years." That evening, a town meeting was called larger than the last, louder, angrier. Silas Crow stood near the back. His presence, like oil, poured quietly onto flame. He spoke of ambushes, of lost wagons, of Apache strength, growing unchecked. "They have a leader now," Crow warned. "A woman. Smart. Strategic. She won't strike until it hurts." Joseph listened from the shadows, noting how easily fear replaced thought. How men nodded along, grateful for certainty, even when it came wrapped in lies. When Joseph finally stepped forward, the room stilled. "You're talking about war," he said calmly, "and none of you have asked why." Whitmore scoffed. "We don't need to ask why." "You do," Joseph replied, "because if you don't understand why someone fights, you'll never know how to stop it." A voice shouted, "You sympathize with them." Joseph met the accusation without flinching. "I sympathize with hunger," he said, "with loss, with being pushed until there's nowhere left to stand." The room erupted. Collins raised his hands, trying to restore order, but the momentum had shifted. Fear demanded action. Subtlety was no longer welcome. That night, riders were sent out to scout Apache positions. Rifles were cleaned again. Children were locked indoors. Mothers prayed for safety and taught their sons to harden their hearts. Joseph slept in the open near the old cottonwood, his senses alert. Before dawn, he felt a change in the air. The quiet had deepened, thickened, as if the land itself were holding its breath. He rose and scanned the horizon. Figures moved along the ridge. Not many. Controlled. Watching. Ayanna's people. Joseph did not approach them. He did not wave or signal. He simply stood where he could be seen, visible in his stillness. He wanted them to know he had come not as an intermediary, not as a negotiator, but as himself. Later that morning, Ayanna appeared at the edge of town alone. Her presence caused immediate alarm. Men reached for weapons. Voices rose. She raised one hand. "I come without violence," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the open ground. "If you wish to speak, speak." Whitmore stepped forward, rifle in hand. "We don't negotiate with threats." Ayanna's gaze swept the gathered men, lingering briefly on Joseph. "Then you will learn only what fear teaches," she said. "And fear is a poor teacher." Joseph moved to stand beside her. The crowd gasped. Ayanna did not look at him, but her voice softened slightly. "You said stand," she murmured. "You are standing." Joseph nodded. "So are you." For a long moment, nothing happened. The valley held its breath again, waiting to see which voice would be louder, fear or restraint. Ayanna spoke once more. "I will not attack this town," she said. "Not today. Not unless forced." Whitmore sneered. "And what do you call this?" He gestured around him. "Your riders watching us from the hills, I call it caution," Ayanna replied. "Something you have forgotten." She turned, then mounting her horse without haste, and rode away. Her riders followed, disappearing into the land as quietly as they had arrived. The town buzzed with confused energy relief, tangled with resentment. Some men lowered their rifles, others gripped them tighter, anger simmering beneath the surface. Joseph felt no victory in the moment, only the sense that this was not over. That restraint had merely postponed something far larger. As the sun dipped low, Collins joined Joseph beneath the cottonwood. "She gave you time," Collins said. Joseph nodded. "Time cuts both ways." Far beyond the valley, Ayanna watched the same sunset, knowing that the next choice, hers or theirs, would decide not just who lived, but what kind of people they would become. And the land, ancient and patient, waited to see which lesson would be learned. The next morning broke without gunfire, and that alone felt unnatural. Joseph Harper woke before dawn, the cottonwood's shadow still long and dark across the ground. The town lay quiet, too quiet, as if everyone were waiting for permission to breathe. He listened to the soft sounds, the creak of a sign in the breeze, a horse shifting in its stall, the distant call of a bird unsure whether it was safe to sing. Restraint had held through the night. That did not mean it would hold through the day. Joseph stood and dusted himself off, scanning the ridge. Nothing moved there now. The Apache riders had withdrawn, leaving behind only uncertainty and rumor. In the absence of action, fear began inventing its own. By mid-morning, men gathered in small knots, speaking in low, urgent voices. Someone claimed the Apache had been seen farther north. Someone else insisted they were circling, waiting for darkness. Each retelling sharpened the story's edges. Joseph kept his distance. He had learned that crowds did not listen, they reacted. He spent the morning helping an old woman repair a broken fence, a quiet act that earned him wary looks and no thanks. It did not matter. Doing something tangible kept his hands steady. Around noon, the air changed again. Dust rose along the southern road, not the scattered drift of wind, but a deliberate plume widening as it approached. Joseph straightened, heart quickening. Others noticed too. Conversation stopped. Doors creaked open. Rifles were lifted, then lowered, then lifted again. A line of riders emerged, moving at a measured pace. They rode in formation, not tight enough to threaten, not loose enough to seem careless. The lead rider sat tall, posture calm, her horse responsive to the slightest shift of weight. The sun caught on the beadwork at her sleeves, on the polished leather of her tack. Authority radiated from her without effort. Ayanna had returned. She halted at the edge of town and waited. The riders behind her did the same, spreading slightly, creating space that signaled intention rather than aggression. Joseph felt it then, a ripple through the crowd, not panic, but recognition. This was not a raid. This was a statement. Caleb Whitmore pushed forward, flanked by armed men who mirrored his tension. He stopped well short of Ayanna, lifting his chin as if daring her to cross an invisible line. "You come back with more of them," Whitmore said. "That's your idea of peace." Ayanna's gaze did not waver. "Peace does not arrive alone," she replied. "It arrives because it is protected." Joseph stepped into the open, placing himself where both sides could see him. The movement drew murmurs. A few men cursed under their breath. Ayanna's eyes flicked to him, then back to Whitmore. "I told you yesterday," she said. "I would not attack unless forced." Whitmore laughed harshly. "And you expect us to believe that I expect you to understand it," Ayanna said. "Belief is not required." She dismounted, the sound of her boots on the dirt loud in the sudden quiet. The riders behind her remained mounted still as carved figures. Ayanna took 3 steps forward and stopped close enough to speak far enough to show restraint. "I have come to talk," she said, "not to beg." Whitmore sneered. "We don't answer to you." Ayanna's voice softened and somehow carried farther for it. "You answer to what you choose to become." Joseph felt the truth of it settle like weight. He had seen men bristle at challenge before, but this was different. Ayanna was not posturing. She was offering a mirror. Silas Crow slipped through the crowd, his voice slick with confidence. "Talk is cheap," he said. "You want something?" Ayanna turned her gaze to him, studying his face as one might assess a poorly built bridge. "Everyone wants something," she said. "Some want land. Some want safety. Some want profit." A few heads turned toward Crow. He smiled thinly. "We want assurance." "You want control," Ayanna replied. "Assurance is earned." Joseph watched the exchange with a growing sense of inevitability. Words were being weighed now, not traded. Each one would matter later. Ayanna lifted her chin slightly. "I propose a boundary," she said. "You keep your fences from crossing the river bend. We keep our riders from crossing your road. Water remains open to both." Whitmore barked a laugh. "You expect us to give up land. I expect you to stop taking it," Ayanna said evenly. The tension sharpened. Fingers tightened on triggers. Joseph felt the moment teeter. He stepped forward another pace. "She's offering a way out," he said. "One that doesn't end with graves." Whitmore rounded on him. "You don't speak for us." Joseph met his gaze. "I'm speaking to you." For a heartbeat, Joseph thought Whitmore might strike him. Instead, Whitmore turned back to Ayanna. And if we refuse, Ayanna's expression did not change. "Then the land will decide." She turned away, then mounting her horse with the same unhurried grace. The riders behind her shifted ready. She looked once more toward Joseph. "You remember the desert," she said softly. "You know what hunger does." Joseph nodded. "I do." Ayanna inclined her head. "Then remember this too." She rode off her people, following the dust settling behind them like a closing door. The town exhaled, some in relief, others in fury. Whitmore spun toward the crowd. "You see," he shouted, "they make demands. Today it's boundaries. Tomorrow it's our homes." Voices rose in agreement. Fear found its footing again. Joseph stood apart, watching the dust dissipate. He felt no triumph in the moment, only the knowledge that restraint had bought time and time would demand payment. That evening, Collins found him by the cottonwood. "They didn't expect her to talk like that," Collins said quietly. "Neither did they expect her to leave," Joseph replied. Collins rubbed his jaw. "Whitmore's pushing for a show of strength." Joseph looked toward the ridge, now empty. "Strength isn't loud," he said. "It waits." Night fell with a restless edge. The town slept poorly. Dreams were crowded with hoofbeats and borders drawn in blood. Joseph lay awake, listening to the land breathe. Somewhere beyond the hills, Ayanna made camp. She sat by her own fire, considering faces, weighing futures. She had returned not to conquer, but to be seen, to make clear that leadership did not require cruelty. Still, she knew restraint would not be mistaken for weakness for long. When dawn came, it would bring a choice sharpened by daylight, and both sides would have to decide whether they feared loss more than they feared becoming something they could not undo. The night after Ayanna's return did not belong to sleep. Joseph Harper lay beneath the cottonwood, eyes open, listening to the restless movements of a town wound too tight to rest. Somewhere a door slammed. Somewhere else a horse whinnied, sensing the tension that humans pretended not to feel. The wind moved through dry leaves like a whisper that refused to finish its thought. Joseph closed his eyes and saw the desert again. He saw a child's eyes wide, dark, unblinking, watching him kneel with bread in his hands. He saw the moment when fear loosened its grip, just enough to allow life to continue. He had carried that image for years, not as a burden, but as a reminder of who he was when no one was watching. Now those eyes had returned, sharpened by time and responsibility. At first light, Joseph rose and walked to the creek, splashing water on his face. His reflection stared back at him, older, leaner, etched with lines the desert had carved. He wondered what Ayanna saw when she looked at him now. A memory, a symbol, or simply a man who had made a choice long ago and never quite escaped it. By mid-morning, the town buzzed with plans disguised as conversations. Caleb Whitmore moved from group to group, voice low, deliberate. He spoke of boundaries and betrayal of leadership that demanded firmness. He did not mention Ayanna's offer by name. He did not need to. Fear did the work for him. Silas Crow lingered nearby, nodding at the right moments, sowing urgency with practiced ease. "If they think we'll bend," he murmured, "they'll keep pushing." Joseph watched from a distance, recognizing the shape of the argument. He had seen it before, men convincing themselves that cruelty was caution, that preemptive violence was wisdom. Deputy Henry Collins approached him, his shoulders heavy. "They're talking about riding out tonight," he said quietly. Joseph nodded. "To show strength." Collins sighed, "to provoke a response." Joseph looked toward the ridge, empty and silent. And if they get one, Collins didn't answer. By afternoon, word spread that Ayanna had sent a messenger. The rider arrived alone, unarmed, stopping well short of town. He carried no banner, only a calm that unsettled those who watched him. When he spoke, his voice was even. "Ayanna asks to meet," he said. "With one man, Joseph Harper." The crowd erupted. Whitmore's face darkened. "Absolutely not." Joseph stepped forward. "I'll go." Whitmore rounded on him. "You'll do no such thing." Joseph met his gaze. "You don't own me." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "You walk into their camp, you won't walk back." Joseph shrugged lightly. "Then you won't have to worry about me anymore." That silenced the crowd. Collins stepped in, voice firm. "If he goes alone. No weapons, no escort." The messenger inclined his head. "That is acceptable." Joseph did not hesitate. He saddled his horse, leaving his rifle behind. He carried only water and the quiet certainty that some conversations could not happen in daylight, surrounded by fear. The ride took them beyond the river bend into land that remembered older paths. The Apache camp appeared gradually shelters arranged with purpose fires burning low, people moving with practiced efficiency. Ayanna waited near the edge, standing rather than seated, as if to remove any sense of hierarchy. Joseph dismounted and approached slowly. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. "You came," Ayanna said. "You asked," Joseph replied. She gestured toward a flat stone near the fire. "Sit." They sat facing each other, the space between them measured, respectful. The camp watched without staring, a quiet circle of awareness. "You know what they plan," Ayanna said. Joseph nodded. "They think force will solve what fear created." Ayanna's eyes held a flicker of something, regret perhaps, or recognition. "Fear is louder than reason," she said. "But reason lasts longer." She studied him then, not as a leader studies a threat, but as a woman measures a memory against the present. "You have aged," she said simply. Joseph smiled faintly. "So has the world." She nodded. "Do you regret it?" He knew what she meant. "The bread, the choice." "No," he said. "Not even when it cost me everything." Ayanna looked into the fire, the flames reflected in her eyes. "Among my people," she said, "we say that debts of kindness are heavier than debts of blood. They do not fade with time." Joseph felt the weight of that settle between them. "I didn't give it to be repaid." "I know," Ayanna said. "That is why it mattered." She leaned forward slightly. "They will ride tonight," she continued. "If they do, someone will die. Perhaps many." Joseph's chest tightened. "What do you want from me?" Ayanna met his gaze. "Stand where you stood," before she said again, "where no one wants to stand." Between them, Joseph said, "Yes." He considered the request, not the danger that was obvious, but the meaning. Being. To step between fear and consequence, to offer himself as proof that another path existed. "If I fail," he asked. Ayanna's voice softened. "Then the land will remember you kindly." Joseph exhaled slowly. "That may not be enough." "It is all any of us ever gets," she replied. They sat in silence as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the camp. Finally, Joseph stood. "I'll go back," he said, "and I'll speak. But you must promise me something." Ayanna raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Give them time," Joseph said, "even if they don't deserve it." Ayanna considered. Then she nodded. "Until the first shot," she said. "After that, I cannot hold my people back." Joseph accepted the boundary. He rode back alone, the sky darkening behind him. As he approached town, he felt eyes watching from windows and doorways. The air crackled with anticipation. Collins met him at the edge. "Did she threaten you?" he asked. "No," Joseph said. "She warned me." That night the town gathered near the road, rifles ready, hearts pounding. Whitmore stood at the front, Crow whispering at his shoulder. Joseph stepped forward into the lantern light. "Listen to me," he said. "They did not want to, but they did. I have stood in hunger," Joseph continued. "I have stood in loss. And I tell you this, if you ride tonight, you will not find safety. You will find an ending you cannot explain to your children." Whitmore scoffed. "You expect us to trust her?" Joseph shook his head. "I expect you to trust yourselves." Silence followed. Uncertain. Fragile. Then somewhere in the dark, a rifle clicked. Joseph turned toward the sound, heart hammering, knowing that whatever came next would erase the fragile line between restraint and ruin. The sound of that rifle click did not fire a bullet, but it fired something else. It snapped the room of night into two halves, before and after splitting the fragile hope Joseph Harper had tried to hold together with words. Every man in the lantern glow stiffened. Every breath tightened. The town, already brittle, seemed to crack, just from the pressure of waiting. Joseph turned slowly, searching the darkness for the source. A young man stood near the back, half hidden behind a wagon wheel, his rifle clutched too tightly for steady hands. His face was pale, eyes wide, not with courage, but with terror. He looked like a boy wearing a man's fear. "Don't," Joseph said quietly, the single word carrying more weight than any speech. The young man swallowed. His finger hovered near the trigger. The crowd watched, as if the decision belonged to all of them. Caleb Whitmore stepped forward, voice sharp. "We're not going to be bullied by a gang of riders and one stubborn cowboy." Joseph did not take his eyes off the rifle. "He's scared," Joseph said, "and you're feeding it." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "Fear keeps a town alive." "No," Joseph replied, still calm. "Fear keeps a town obedient." A murmur rippled quickly, swallowed by silence. Deputy Henry Collins moved closer to the young man, palms open, voice low. "Easy," he murmured. "Lower it." The rifle dropped an inch, then another. The boy's shoulders shook. He looked around as though expecting someone to tell him what to feel. Joseph stepped toward him, slow as sunrise. "Go home," he said. "Hold your mother's hand, and remember you're still human." The boy blinked rapidly, then turned and stumbled away, swallowed by the dark. The crowd exhaled in uneasy relief, but relief had teeth. It made people resentful. It made them feel weak for not breaking something when they had the chance. Whitmore seized the moment. "This proves it," he declared. "They're already inside our heads. We need to show strength tonight." Joseph's voice cut through him. "Strength isn't a night ride." Whitmore glared. "Then what is it?" Joseph looked at the faces around him. Men who wanted permission to be ruthless, men who wanted someone else to carry the guilt for them. "Strength," he said, "is staying your hand when every story you've ever been told demands you raise it." Silence again, but not the kind that listened, the kind that waited to pounce. Collins stepped up beside Joseph. "Enough," the deputy said. "No one rides out tonight. Not under my watch." Whitmore's lips curled. "You think you can stop us?" Collins held his ground. "I can arrest you." Whitmore laughed once harshly. "For defending our own town." Collins' eyes hardened. "For starting a war." The standoff did not end with agreement. It ended with exhaustion. Men drifted away in frustrated knots, muttering oaths and promises for tomorrow. Whitmore left last, staring at Joseph as though memorizing the shape of his defiance. Joseph stayed by the cottonwood long after the lanterns dimmed, feeling the valley's quiet return in uneasy waves. He knew this was not resolved. He had only postponed the blow, and somewhere beyond the ridgeline, Ayanna's camp waited in disciplined silence, their patience stretched thin by the weight of their leader's restraint. At dawn, Joseph rode out alone. Not to the Apache camp this time, but to the river bend, Ayanna's proposed boundary. He needed to see it with his own eyes to understand what the land offered and what it denied. Water ran shallow there, catching the early light like a thin ribbon of promise. Mesquite and cottonwood clustered near the banks, the only shade for miles. It was a place worth fighting over. Joseph dismounted and knelt, letting the cool water run through his fingers. He thought of the town claiming it, as if possession could erase history. He thought of the Apache needing it not as a luxury, but as survival. Behind him, hoofbeats approached. Joseph did not reach for a weapon. He simply stood and turned. Ayanna rode into view with two companions, stopping at a respectful distance. She dismounted, her eyes scanning Joseph's face as if searching for news. "Did they ride?" she asked. "No," Joseph said. "Not last night." Ayanna's shoulders eased slightly, though her expression remained controlled. "Then your words held." "For a night," Joseph said. Ayanna nodded. "A night can save lives." Joseph looked toward the horizon, then back to her. "They're not afraid of you," he said carefully. "They're afraid of what you represent. Change. Consequence." Ayanna's gaze sharpened. "And you?" she asked. "What, are you afraid of Joseph Harper?" He hesitated. "I'm afraid," he admitted, "that they'll force you to become what they already believe you are." Ayanna's face did not change, but something flickered behind her eyes, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of the same fear living within her. "My people expect me to protect them," she said softly. "Protection is not always gentle." Joseph nodded. "I know." Ayanna took a step closer. "When you fed me," she said, "I learned something. Not about settlers, about humans. That there are some who choose mercy even when it costs them." Joseph's throat tightened. "I was hungry too," he said, as if reminding her it had not been heroism. "That is why it mattered." Ayanna replied, "If you had been full, it would have been easy. You gave from emptiness." The words landed heavy. Joseph looked away, blinking against something that had nothing to do with the sun. Ayanna continued. "Leadership is like that," she said. "You give from emptiness. You choose restraint when your people want release. And if you choose wrong, you lose them." Joseph studied her. The authority she carried was not loud. It was disciplined, earned. But he could see the strain beneath it, the pressure of being the wall between her people and the world's hunger. "What will you do?" he asked. "If Whitmore rides out anyway." Ayanna's answer came after a pause. "Then I will answer as a leader," she said, "not as a starving girl remembers." Joseph felt the warning in her words. Gratitude lived in her, yes, but it did not erase responsibility. Mercy had shaped her, but power demanded calculations Mercy could not always afford. He nodded slowly. "Then we have to keep him from riding." Ayanna's gaze shifted back toward town. "Whitmore," she said, tasting the name like bitter smoke. "Men like him do not stop because they understand. They stop because they cannot win. Joseph met her eyes again. And what does winning look like to you? Ayanna's face softened just slightly. Winning, she said, is my people drinking water without fear. It is children sleeping without listening for hoofbeats. It is not graves. Joseph held her gaze. Then let me help you, he said. Not with rifles, with truth. Ayanna's expression did not waver. Truth is dangerous, she murmured. It always has been, Joseph replied. Ayanna stepped back, signaling the end of the meeting. Tonight, she said, I will send scouts closer, not to threaten, to watch. Joseph nodded. And I'll go back to town and watch Whitmore. Ayanna mounted her horse, then paused. Joseph Harper, she said. Yes. Her eyes held his. If they force this, remember that restraint is not weakness. Not for you. Not for me. Joseph swallowed. I'll remember, he said. She rode away, her companions following, leaving Joseph alone by the waterline with the weight of her words. He returned to town as the sun dipped, finding Whitmore already gathering men near the stable. Silas Crow stood among them, smiling like a man watching a match being struck. Joseph dismounted and stepped forward. Don't do it, he said. Whitmore's grin was sharp. Or what? You'll give another speech, Joseph's voice lowered. Or you'll start something your sons won't survive. Whitmore leaned closer, eyes cold. Maybe I want that. Maybe I want them to learn what it means to take and keep. Joseph stared at him, the truth settling heavy. This wasn't fear driving Whitmore anymore. It was pride, and pride Joseph knew was far harder to disarm than a rifle. Joseph Harper understood then that pride had become the sharpest weapon in the valley. It gleamed in Caleb Whitmore's eyes as plainly as any rifle barrel, cold and polished by years of getting his way. Fear had opened the door, but pride had stepped through and claimed the room. Joseph felt it settle into the town like a sickness, quiet, contagious, difficult to confront without pain. Whitmore finished gathering his men just after dusk. There were not many, 8 in all, but each carried a gun and the confidence that came from being told over and over that they were right to protect what was theirs. Silas Crow lingered nearby, whispering encouragement, selling certainty like a tonic. Joseph stepped into the lantern light. You won't win, he said calmly. Whitmore turned irritated. You again. Joseph did not raise his voice. You'll ride out thinking you're defending this town. You'll come back with blood on your hands or not at all. And either way, this place will never be the same. Whitmore snorted. You sound like you care. Joseph held his gaze. I do. That's the difference. A man in Whitmore's group shifted uneasily. Caleb, he muttered, maybe we should wait. Whitmore cut him off. Wait for what? For them to surround us, for them to decide how much we're allowed to keep. Joseph stepped closer. You're not afraid of them taking land, he said. You're afraid of losing the story you've told yourself, that you earned everything you have. The words struck harder than a slap. Whitmore's face flushed. Watch your mouth. Joseph did not back down. Your fences didn't go up on empty ground. You know that. Everyone here knows it. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Some men looked away. Others frowned uncomfortable. Joseph pressed on. You didn't just buy land cheap. You pressured families who had nowhere else to go. You pushed boundaries because no one stopped you. Whitmore's voice dropped dangerous. You accusing me of something? Joseph nodded once. I'm telling the truth. Silas Crow laughed softly. Truth is whatever keeps you alive. Joseph turned to him. Is that what you tell yourself when you sell fear for profit? Crow's smile faltered just for a moment. Whitmore raised his rifle slightly, not pointing it, but close enough to make the message clear. You're done talking, Joseph. Joseph met his gaze steadily. Then, hear this before you go. Ayanna offered a boundary, not because she's weak, but because she's strong enough to choose restraint. If you cross that river tonight, you won't be facing starving children. You'll be facing a leader who has already chosen patience over revenge. Whitmore laughed sharp and dismissive. I'm not afraid of a woman on a horse. Joseph's voice hardened. Then you don't understand leadership at all. The men mounted up anyway. Joseph stood aside, watching them ride out under the moonlight dust rising behind them like a bad omen. He felt no triumph in having spoken the truth, only the heavy certainty that it had arrived too late for some. He turned and found Deputy Henry Collins watching from the shadows. They won't listen, Collins said quietly. Joseph shook his head. They never do. Not when the truth costs them something. Collins hesitated. What will you do? Joseph looked toward the dark road. What I should have done years ago, he said. Make sure the truth doesn't die quietly. He mounted his horse and followed far enough back to avoid being seen close enough to witness what came next. The river bend glimmered under the moon, thin and deceptive. Whitmore's group slowed as they approached, scanning the ridgeline for movement. The night was still too still. Joseph felt it before he saw it. Figures emerged from the shadows, not rushing, not shouting. Apache riders took shape along the ridge and near the trees, positions chosen with care. They did not surround Whitmore's men completely. They left space. Ayanna stepped forward into the moonlight. "Turn back," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the water. "No one needs to die tonight." Whitmore laughed, raising his rifle. "Move aside." Ayanna did not move. "You cross the boundary. You don't set boundaries for us," Whitmore snapped. Ayanna's gaze flicked briefly to Joseph, hidden among the trees, then returned to Whitmore. "I did," she said. "Because someone here remembers hunger." Whitmore scoffed. "I don't care what you remember." He lifted his rifle higher. Joseph's heart slammed against his ribs. He started forward, but it was already happening. A shot rang out, not from Whitmore. One of his men, young shaking, had fired into the darkness, panic overriding discipline. The sound shattered the night like glass. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then Ayanna raised her hand. Apache riders shifted, not charging, not retreating, but tightening their formation just enough to make the message clear. They were ready. They had been ready for a long time. Ayanna's voice cut through the tension. "Enough!" She did not shout. She did not threaten. She named the moment. Joseph stepped out from the trees, moving into the open. "Stop," he called. "All of you." Whitmore spun toward him, rage blazing. "Get out of the way." Joseph did not move. He stood between the two sides, the river at his back, the land holding its breath around them. "This ends now," Joseph said. "You wanted the truth. Here it is. You're not protecting this town. You're protecting your pride, and you're willing to spill blood to do it." Whitmore sneered. "And what about you?" "You think standing there makes you better?" "No," Joseph replied. "It makes me responsible." Ayanna watched him closely, her expression unreadable. Joseph continued, voice steady. "You tell yourselves Apache are the threat, but you never ask why they're here. You never ask what you took or who you pushed aside. You bury the truth and call it safety." Silence followed, heavy charged. Whitmore's men shifted, uncertainty creeping in. They had not come for a speech. They had come for permission to be violent. Joseph turned slightly, addressing them directly. "If you fire another shot tonight, you'll carry it forever. Not just the blood, but the knowing that you chose this when another path was offered." One of the men lowered his rifle, then another. Whitmore stared in disbelief. "You cowards," he hissed. Ayanna spoke, then her voice calm and resolute. "Leadership is not measured by how much fear you create," she said. "It is measured by how much blood you refuse to spill." She gestured toward the river. "Turn back. Take your wounded pride with you. Let this end." Whitmore looked around, realizing the ground beneath him had shifted. His men were no longer certain. The Apache riders were not attacking, but they were not yielding either. For the first time, doubt cracked his certainty. Whitmore spat into the dirt. "This isn't over," he snarled. Ayanna met his gaze. "No," she said, "it isn't. But tonight it will not be decided by violence." Whitmore turned away abruptly, signaling his men to follow. They retreated, their confidence fractured, leaving behind only dust and the bitter taste of near disaster. Joseph exhaled slowly, his legs unsteady now that the moment had passed. Ayanna approached him. "You spoke the truth," she said quietly. Joseph nodded. "They didn't want it." She looked back toward the town. "Truth does not need permission," she said. "It only needs witnesses." Joseph met her eyes, understanding the weight of what had been revealed, not just about land or boundaries, but about who each of them chose to be. And he knew then that this was only the beginning. Because truth once unearthed does not stay buried. The valley did not celebrate the night's restraint. Dawn came gray and unsettled, as if the land itself were unsure whether peace had truly been chosen or merely postponed. Joseph Harper rode back toward town with a weight in his chest that no sunrise could lift. He had stood between rifles and consequence and watched pride recoil, but pride, he knew, never retreated far. It regrouped. It waited. Behind him, the river bend shimmered quietly, bearing witness to a decision that could have gone the other way. Ahead, the town gathered itself like a wounded animal, bristling with confusion and resentment. Joseph dismounted at the edge of the square. Eyes followed him, some wary, some grateful, some sharpened by humiliation. A few men nodded almost imperceptibly. Others turned away, jaws tight. The story of the night had already begun to change, shaped by who told it. Caleb Whitmore did not appear. That absence spoke louder than any speech. Deputy Henry Collins found Joseph near the cottonwood, his expression drawn. "They're angry," he said. "Not just at him. At you." Joseph nodded. "I expected that." Collins hesitated. "There's talk of arrest." "For what?" Joseph asked. "Incitement," Collins replied. "Interfering with town business." Joseph gave a thin smile. "Truth has always been a nuisance." Collins looked toward the ridge. "Ayanna's riders are closer today." "They're watching," Joseph said. "The same as we are." Midday brought heat and tension in equal measure. Men drifted toward the saloon, toward the stable, toward the places where decisions hardened. Silas Crow moved among them, voice smooth, offering a narrative that restored wounded pride. "He embarrassed us," Crow murmured, "put our authority on display for them." Joseph listened from a distance, recognizing the shape of the lie. It was easier to blame a man than to face a mirror. By afternoon, Whitmore emerged at last. He stood on the porch of the saloon, pale but composed, his eyes burning with a resolve that frightened Joseph more than anger would have. He raised his hand for silence. "Last night," Whitmore said, "we showed restraint." A murmur rose, some approving, some uncertain. "Don't mistake that for weakness," Whitmore continued. "The Apache tested us. They pushed. They watched to see how far they could go." Joseph felt the shift ripple through the crowd. Words like tested and pushed settled easily into wounded egos. Whitmore's gaze found Joseph. "Some among us chose to stand with them." The accusation hung heavy. Joseph stepped forward. "I stood between blood and mercy," he said calmly. "That's all." Whitmore smiled thinly. "You stood in the way." Joseph met his eyes. "Of what?" "Of certainty," Whitmore replied. "Of keeping our people safe." Joseph shook his head. "You call it certainty. I call it pride." The crowd stirred. Whitmore lifted his voice. "We will not be dictated to, not by riders on a ridge, not by a man who abandoned this town and returned to lecture us." Joseph felt the sting of truth mixed with lie. He had left. He had returned, but he had not come to lecture. He raised his hands, palms open. "I didn't come to lead you," he said. "I came to remind you of a choice you still have." Whitmore scoffed. "We've made it." Joseph's voice dropped. "Then make it with your eyes open." Before Whitmore could respond, a shout rose from the edge of town. A rider approached alone, unarmed, moving at a measured pace that demanded attention. He stopped at the square and dismounted. It was the messenger again. "Ayanna requests a council," the man said. "Today, at the river bend." The crowd erupted. Whitmore laughed. "She's bold." Joseph watched Whitmore closely. "She's offering a final chance." Whitmore's smile did not reach his eyes. "We'll attend," he said. "On our terms." Joseph felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. "Your terms are the problem." The ride to the river bend was tense and silent. Whitmore brought men too many. Joseph brought only himself. Collins rode between them, his badge feeling small against the weight of the moment. Ayanna waited at the waterline, flanked by elders and riders, whose stillness radiated discipline. She stepped forward as the settlers dismounted. "This is your last warning," Whitmore said immediately. "Pull your riders back, accept our authority, or this ends." Ayanna's gaze remained steady. "Authority without justice is only noise," she said. "I offered boundaries. You refused." Whitmore gestured toward Joseph. "Because of him." Ayanna glanced at Joseph, then back to Whitmore. "No," she said. "Because of you." Joseph felt the truth of it settle like stone. Whitmore's voice rose. "You expect us to give up land because you ask politely." Ayanna's tone did not change. "I expect you to stop taking it because it is wrong." Whitmore laughed sharply. "Wrong according to who?" Ayanna answered without hesitation. "According to hunger, according to graves, according to the land that remembers." Silence followed. Joseph stepped forward. "You asked what safety looks like," he said to Whitmore. "It looks like not needing rifles to sleep at night." Whitmore's eyes burned. "And what does justice look like to you, Joseph?" Joseph considered. "It looks like truth spoken out loud," he said, "even when it costs." Whitmore's jaw clenched. "Then let's speak truth." He turned to the elders behind Ayanna. "Your people have raided. They've killed. You're not innocent." Ayanna nodded. "No one here is," she said. "That is why restraint matters." Whitmore's voice hardened. "Then here is my truth. We will not retreat. We will not give up land. And if you cross that river again, we will answer with force." Joseph felt the hour tighten around them, the narrow space where mercy still breathed. Ayanna lifted her hand. Her rider shifted not forward, not back, but ready. She looked at Joseph. "This is the hour," she said softly. "Between blood and mercy." Joseph met her gaze. "Then choose mercy," he said, "and let me carry the cost." Whitmore barked a laugh. "You think martyrdom scares us?" Joseph turned to him. "It should," he said, "because it exposes what you're willing to become." Ayanna lowered her hand slowly. "We will not cross today," she said. "We will not attack. We will give you time." Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "Time for what?" "For you to decide who you are," Ayanna replied. She turned away, signaling her people to withdraw a measured distance, not retreating but refusing the bait. Joseph exhaled, feeling the tension ease by inches. Whitmore watched them go, then turned to Joseph, his voice low and venomous. "This ends with you," he said. "One way or another." Joseph nodded. "That's often how truth works." As the sun dipped and the council dispersed, Joseph felt the weight of what had been postponed settle heavier than any conclusion. Mercy had been chosen again, but mercy was running out of space, because pride had been wounded publicly, and wounded pride, Joseph knew, would not rest until it claimed its price. The night after the council settled over the valley like a held breath. Joseph Harper returned to town with the sense that something had shifted, not outwardly, not yet, but deep beneath the surface where decisions fermented before breaking into action. Mercy had been chosen again, but it had been chosen under pressure, and pressure left marks. He felt them in the way doors closed more quickly as he passed, in the way conversations dropped into silence, in the way even Deputy Henry Collins avoided meeting his eyes for too long, as if association itself had become dangerous. Joseph understood. Towns did not forgive men who made them doubt themselves. He spent the evening near the cottonwood mending a frayed strap with hands that had learned patience the hard way. The simple work steadied him. He knew Whitmore was not finished. Pride did not retreat. It circled, waiting for a cleaner strike. Just before midnight, Joseph heard the hoofbeats. Not many. 3, perhaps 4. Quiet. Intentional. He rose slowly, heart steady, and stepped into the open. Caleb Whitmore dismounted first, his face pale in the moonlight, eyes bright with a resolve sharpened into something brittle. 2 men followed, rifles slung, expressions tight. Silas Crow lingered in the shadows watching. "You should have left when you had the chance," Whitmore said. Joseph folded his hands loosely in front of him. "I'm still here." Whitmore's mouth twitched. "You've made yourself a symbol." Joseph nodded. "So have you." Whitmore stepped closer. "This ends tonight." Joseph met his gaze. "Then end it without blood." Whitmore laughed softly. "Always preaching." Joseph's voice remained calm. "I'm offering you a way out. A way out of what," Whitmore snapped, "of becoming the thing you keep accusing others of being." Joseph said. Whitmore's face flushed. "You think you know me," Joseph considered. "I think you're afraid of losing what you took for granted." The words landed. One of the men behind Whitmore shifted uneasily. Whitmore raised his hand, silencing him. "You've interfered long enough," he said. "The town will breathe easier without you." Joseph understood then what this was. Not an arrest, not justice, an erasure. "You're gonna kill me," Joseph said quietly. Whitmore's eyes flickered. "You won't be missed." Joseph looked past him toward the dark edge of town, where lantern light thinned into nothing. He thought of Sarah, of the bread, of Ayanna standing at the river bend choosing restraint again and again. He made his decision. Joseph reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for a folded paper worn soft with age. He held it out. "What's that?" Whitmore asked. "A deed," Joseph said, "to the land by the river bend." Whitmore frowned. "You don't own that." "I do," Joseph replied. "Bought it years ago." Quietly. "Never fenced it. Never claimed it." Whitmore hesitated, then took the paper, unfolding it beneath the moonlight. His eyes scanned the words. His breath caught. "It's yours," Joseph said. "All of it. The water access, the grazing rights. Signed over." Whitmore looked up sharply. Why? Joseph met his gaze. "Because it ends this." Silence stretched thick and disbelieving. "You think land buys peace?" Whitmore scoffed. "No," Joseph said. "I think land removes your excuse." Whitmore stared at the deed, then at Joseph, suspicion warring with greed. "You'd give this up. For them. For the truth," Joseph corrected. "You said this was about safety, about territory. Now you have it. If you still choose violence, everyone will know what this was really about." One of the men behind Whitmore swallowed hard. "Caleb!" Whitmore's jaw tightened. He had not expected this. Not surrender, not sacrifice. Joseph had taken the ground out from under him, literally and figuratively. Silas Crow stepped forward, voice smooth. "Think carefully," he said to Whitmore. "You're being played." Joseph turned to Crow. "You thrive on conflict," he said. "This starves you." Crow's smile thinned. Whitmore folded the deed slowly. "You give this to me," he said, "and you expect me to stop." "I expect you to choose," Joseph replied, with no lies left to hide behind. For a long moment, Whitmore said nothing. Then he laughed, short, sharp, brittle. "Fine," he said. "I'll take it." Joseph nodded. "Then take this too." He stepped closer, removing his hat, setting it on the ground between them. "I'll leave," Joseph said. "At first light. No speeches, no stands. I'll go where I won't be in the way of your town." One of Whitmore's men frowned. That's it, Joseph said. Whitmore studied him, searching for trickery. Finding none unsettled him more than any threat. "See that you do," Whitmore said. Joseph nodded again. "I always keep my word." Whitmore mounted his horse, the deed tucked safely inside his coat. As he rode away, Crow lingered a moment longer, eyes cold. "You think this makes you righteous," Crow said quietly. Joseph met his gaze. "No," he said. "It makes me done." Crow snorted and followed Whitmore into the dark. Joseph stood alone again. Beneath the cottonwood, the night suddenly vast and empty. At dawn, he kept his promise. He packed what little he owned, leaving behind the cabin, the tools, the quiet life he had built from nothing. He did not look back as he rode toward the open land beyond the valley, but he did not go far. At the river bend, Ayanna waited. She had seen it all from a distance, the late-night visit, the riders leaving the shift in the town's posture by morning. She met Joseph's gaze as he dismounted. "You gave up the land," she said. Joseph nodded. "It was never really mine." Ayanna studied him, understanding dawning slowly. "You disarmed him." Joseph shrugged lightly. "I removed his story." She was silent for a long moment. "My people will drink there now," she said, "without fear." Joseph smiled faintly. That was the idea. Ayanna stepped closer. "And you, I'll keep moving," Joseph said. "I always do." Ayanna's eyes softened. "You should not have had to." Joseph looked toward the horizon. "Some acts are only possible when a man has nothing left to lose." She considered him, then nodded once. "You chose a hard ending," she said. Joseph met her gaze. "I chose a clean one." Ayanna raised her hand, signaling her riders to remain back. She stood alone with him by the waterline. "You fed a starving girl once," she said. "You fed a people tonight." Joseph shook his head. "I just moved something out of the way." Ayanna's voice was steady, reverent. "That is leadership." As Joseph turned to leave, she spoke once more. "This is not the end," she said. "The town will face what it has done." Joseph paused, then nodded. "I know." He mounted his horse and rode away, the sun rising behind him. And for the first time in years, the valley breathed without fear. But consequences, Joseph knew, did not end with sacrifice. They waited patient and exacting for the final reckoning still to come. Joseph Harper rode until the valley fell behind him, until the familiar shapes of Cottonwood and Riverbend softened into memory. He did not know where he was going, only where he was no longer needed. The land stretched open and indifferent, offering no direction, only distance. Yet distance, he would learn, did not mean escape. Behind him, the town woke to a quieter morning than it deserved. Caleb Whitmore stood on the porch of the saloon deed folded carefully inside his coat and watched Apache riders approach the river bend without resistance. They came openly, women and children among them, their movements calm, unhurried. They knelt by the water, drank filled skins, laughed softly. No rifles were raised. Whitmore felt something twist inside his chest, something close to relief and closer still to humiliation. He had won the land. He had secured the boundary. And yet the victory tasted thin, stripped of the violence that would have justified it. Silas Crow watched from the shadows, his jaw tight. Conflict had slipped through his fingers like water. The town watched too. Men stood along the road silent. Women peered from doorways. Children stared openly curiosity, warring with lessons learned too early. They had expected thunder. They had prepared for blood. Instead, they saw restraint. That unsettled them more than violence ever could. By midday, word spread that Ayanna had called her people to the river bend not to claim it, but to acknowledge it. Elders gathered. Riders dismounted. Ayanna stood at the center, her presence steady, her gaze thoughtful. "This water is life," she said, "not a prize." Her people listened. "We will drink," she continued. "We will pass through, but we will not take what is not offered, not because we are weak, but because we choose what kind of future remembers us." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Ayanna lifted her chin, looking toward the town. "There will be no celebration," she said. "No boasting. Mercy does not demand applause." And yet the weight of her decision carried far. Deputy Henry Collins approached the river bend cautiously, hat in hand, uncertainty etched into his face. He stopped at a respectful distance. "Ayanna," he said, "the town wants to know what comes next." Ayanna studied him. "That depends on what your town chooses to do with the truth," she replied. Collins swallowed. "Whitmore claims he secured peace." Ayanna's gaze sharpened slightly. "Peace was offered before he accepted," she said. "The difference matters." Collins nodded, understanding more than he said. And Joseph Ayanna's expression softened. Joseph chose to leave. "Will you call him back?" Collins asked. Ayanna shook her head. "Leadership is knowing when not to pull someone into the fire again." As the day wore on, the town's certainty continued to erode. Men who had ridden with Whitmore avoided his gaze. They remembered how easily he had taken the deed, how quickly he had accepted Joseph's departure. Some wondered aloud what else he might give away if it suited him. Whispers began. Joseph gave up the land. He saved us. He embarrassed Whitmore. Truth once unearthed did not stay quiet. By evening, a small group gathered near the saloon, not angry this time, but uneasy. They spoke of boundaries and bargains of the night that had almost been of the man who had stood between blood and consequence and then walked away. Whitmore emerged, sensing the shift. "We have peace," he declared. "That's what matters." A voice answered from the crowd. "At what cost?" Whitmore's eyes hardened. "The cost of leadership." Another voice followed. "Or the price of pride." Silence fell. Whitmore realized then that he had misjudged the town. He had believed fear would bind them to him. Instead, it had bound them to doubt. That night, he drank alone. Silas Crow left town before dawn, his wagons rolling quietly away. There was no profit left here, no flames to fan, no certainty to sell. Conflict had starved him at last. Days passed. Apache riders continued to pass through the river bend without incident. The town adjusted reluctantly at first, then with cautious acceptance. Children grew curious. Women noticed that the world had not ended, and somewhere beyond the valley, Joseph Harper lived quietly among the hills, trading labor for meals, sleeping beneath open skies. He carried no regret, only the steady ache of knowing he had done what he could. One evening, as the sun bled gold into the horizon, hoofbeats approached. Joseph turned, hand shading his eyes. Ayanna rode toward him alone. He did not look surprised. "I wondered when you'd find me." She dismounted, studying his face. "You left before the judgment was finished." Joseph smiled faintly. "I wasn't the one to pass it." Ayanna nodded. "No, that was my burden." She sat beside him on a rock, warmed by the day. For a long moment they watched the light fade. "The town will survive," Ayanna said, "but it will remember. Whitmore's authority is thinner now. He will never be certain again." Joseph exhaled slowly. "That's enough." Ayanna turned to him. "You gave up land. You gave up place. Do you regret that?" Joseph shook his head. "Land can be claimed. Integrity can't." She studied him, eyes thoughtful. "My people asked if we should honor you," she said. Joseph raised an eyebrow. "Honor makes me nervous." Ayanna smiled just a little. "I told them this, that some debts are not repaid with ceremony. They are repaid by choosing better." Joseph felt a quiet warmth spread through him. "That's more than enough." Ayanna rose, preparing to leave. "There is one more thing," she said. "Yes." She met his gaze, voice steady. "You fed a starving girl. You fed a future. That does not end when you ride away." Joseph swallowed. "Neither does responsibility." Ayanna nodded. "No, it doesn't." She mounted her horse, pausing once more. "If you ever wish to return," she said, "the river will remember you." Joseph smiled. "I hope it remembers peace." As she rode off, Joseph watched until she disappeared into the land, her silhouette merging with dusk. He sat alone, then the world quiet around him. He thought of Sarah, of promises kept, of choices made without witness or reward. And he understood that judgment, when it came, did not always arrive as punishment or praise. Sometimes it arrived as something far harder to carry, the knowledge that you had done what was right, and the world had changed because of it. Years later, the valley no longer held its breath. The land had learned a slower rhythm, one not built on fear or rumor, but on uneasy coexistence that gradually softened into something resembling trust. The river bend remained open. Apache riders passed through in daylight, not in secrecy. Settlers drew water without glancing over their shoulders. Children grew up seeing faces their parents had once taught them to fear. Not all wounds healed, but they no longer festered. Caleb Whitmore still owned much of the land, but ownership had changed shape. Authority without certainty had humbled him. He spoke less at meetings, now listening more than commanding. Some nights, when the town lay quiet, he wondered how differently things might have gone if he had chosen humility before being forced into it. Deputy Henry Collins grew older, slower, and finally laid his badge down. When asked what he was proudest of, he spoke not of arrests or order, but of one night when no one died. Silas Crow never returned, and Joseph Harper remained a story told in lowered voices than in thoughtful ones. Some said he had been foolish, giving up land that could have secured him comfort in old age. Others said he had been brave. Most over time said something simpler. He did what needed to be done when no one else would. Joseph himself never claimed credit. He lived quietly, moving with the seasons, trading labor for meals, sleeping beneath stars that asked nothing of him. His hair turned silver, his steps slowed, but his eyes remained clear steady, with a peace not easily shaken. One autumn morning, he returned to the valley, not as a man seeking a place, but as a man closing a circle. He rode to the river bend and dismounted, letting his horse drink while he watched the water flow as it always had, indifferent to ownership, loyal only to gravity and time. The cottonwoods whispered in the breeze. The land felt settled. Ayanna arrived shortly after. She was older now, 2 lines of leadership etched gently into her face. She dismounted and joined him without ceremony, the years between them folding easily into silence. "They still tell your story," she said. Joseph smiled faintly. "Stories grow legs." Ayanna nodded. "And meaning." They sat together, watching the water carry leaves downstream. "My people have changed," Ayanna said. "So have yours. Not perfectly, not quickly, but enough." Joseph considered that. "Enough is rare," he said. "Most people chase more." Ayanna glanced at him. "You never did." He shrugged. "I learned early that more doesn't always fill what's missing." She studied him, thoughtful. "When you fed me," she said softly, "you gave me more than food. You gave me a question." Joseph looked at her. "What question?" She met his gaze. "What kind of leader do I want to be?" Joseph swallowed. "And what answer did you find?" Ayanna smiled, not with pride, but with certainty. "One who remembers hunger and chooses restraint anyway." They fell quiet again. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the water, Ayanna rose. "My people will move camp soon," she said. "North, where the winters are kinder." Joseph nodded. "Travel safe." She hesitated, then spoke with deliberate care. "You could come with us." Joseph looked up, surprised. "You would be welcome," she said. "Not as a symbol, as a man." Joseph felt the weight of the offer settle in his chest. For a moment, he imagined it shared fire's voices at dusk, belonging without ownership. Then he smiled gently. "I think my journey is quieter than that," he said. "But thank you." Ayanna inclined her head, understanding. "Some paths are meant to be walked alone." She mounted her horse, pausing once more. "You once told me that some acts are only possible when a person has nothing left to lose," she said. Joseph nodded. Ayanna's voice softened. "You were wrong." Joseph looked at her. "You had something," she said. "You had your soul, and you chose to spend it carefully." She rode away, leaving Joseph with the river and the truth of her words. As dusk deepened, Joseph sat alone, listening to the land breathe. He thought of Sarah, of promises kept, of bread broken and shared, of a life that would never be remembered in monuments, but would echo quietly in choices made by others. That was enough. When Joseph Harper died years later, it was under an open sky, the river not far away. There was no crowd, no ceremony, only the land patient as ever. But the valley remembered him. It remembered a man who stood between hunger and fear, a man who chose mercy when pride demanded blood, a man who proved that the smallest act done at the right moment could outlast violence, outlive hatred, and quietly reshape the world. This story is not about the Wild West alone. It is about the moments in our own lives when no one is watching, when kindness costs us something, when doing the right thing brings no applause, and when walking away feels harder than holding on. Joseph Harper did not change the world with power or force. He changed it with a single choice made in silence. a piece of bread, a step back, a refusal to let fear decide who he would become. In a world that often rewards pride and noise, this story reminds us that true strength is quiet. It is found in restraint, in compassion, and in the courage to stand alone if that is what conscience demands. Sometimes the greatest legacy we leave behind is not what we gain, but what we give up, so others may live with dignity. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what part stayed with you the most. And if you enjoy stories that carry heart, history, and meaning, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one.